But let's talk about his contract, because this is something I think that is very interesting. He's taking a minimum deal. A la Jameis Winston did this down in the Saints. I think Jameis's upside's like $3.5 million. Cam's is $7.5 million. If they bring in any other players, they won't have enough money on the cap. Will that mean that they'll have to renegotiate somebody's deal during the season to open enough space for his incentive-based contract? I don't think I fully understand how that'll work out.
Well, a little bit on salary cap 101 for you and your viewers, because if it's phrased by NFL media as up to $7.5 million, what that tells me it's like $1 million or whatever the minimum is, and then a whole bunch of incentives. Incentives are likely, which means they count on the cap if the player earned that in his last season. So in other words, if Cam had 10 touchdowns his last season, anything under 10 touchdowns incentive would count against the cap. Anything over that would not count against the cap, only would be funneled in if he got that at the end of the year. So my guess is, because Cam hardly played his last year, everything is going to be unlikely to be earned, which means they don't count against the cap until if and when they're earned at the end of 2020. So basically, I'm thinking they have a cap number of Cam Newton of about $1 million. And everything else is on the come because it's not likely to be earned with the cap calculation.
Okay, and then everybody thinks that the Patriots are going to have the most money out of everybody next year. Now, nobody knows what the salary cap is going to be with this season, right? You and I have talked about this. There's been a lot of reports about this. If there's no fans in the stands, but if they still had the advertising tarps that they're putting up, nobody knows what the salary cap is going to be, even though TV deals are up, whatever. Could they potentially, would that incentive-based stuff, like $6.5 million, would that go into next year's cap then? Is that what it would happen, or how would that all play out?
If he earns it, okay, then you do it's called the netting. It's something I did at the end of every year. How many incentives on your books didn't get earned that you were counting versus incentives on your books did get earned that you weren't counting, and you funnel all that up and you see if it's a credit or a debit. If it's a credit, you get money towards your next year's cap. If it's a debit, you get money taken away from next year's cap. So if he earns $6 million of incentives and the Patriots have nothing else on their books of incentives that were counting and didn't get earned, yeah, it's $6 million off the 2021 cap. That's how it works.
So that could have gone up to $10 million, $15 million. That number, if it was all incentive based, could have been as big as they wanted because their 2021 cap is as big as possible. Why do you think 7.5 was the number where it was at? I assume there's wins involved, offensive percentage, plays, and stuff like that. Do you think that they knew that $7.5 million was enough for Cam to be like, okay, let's do it? Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think they looked at the market and they said, you got nothing. I mean, let's be honest. They said, you got nothing, here's what we'll do. And you're absolutely right, Pat. This incentive-based, my sense of what it is for him to get $7.5 million, he has to play 80% of the plays.
He will.
Win win the Super Bowl, lead the team, lead the league in yards passing, lead the league in touchdowns, whatever it is. That's how these incentives work. These maximum incentives. I mean,
Andrew, he's going to win. He's going to do it. I think this is going to be a scene where, like, when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars from a business standpoint, they get rid of Nick Foles, they bring in Mike Glennon, right? Who knows how their salary cap's going to go? And then let's look at the Bears. They're paying $21 million for two quarterbacks that both of them, neither one of them are as good as Cam Newton. Now, granted, Nick Foles might come out and be, Super Bowl champion, legit, might be unbelievable. Nobody knows, but he's in a fair competition with Mitchell Trubisky. Why do you think nobody was, because Schefter's come out and said nobody else was interested in Cam other than the greatest team in the league, basically. Why is that, you think? Is it business-wise? Do you think it's personal-wise? What do you think it is?
My feeling is teams looked at Cam Newton, let's take the politics out of it, in some ways the way they looked at Colin Kaepernick. That this guy we cannot trust, if you will, to come in and be our starting quarterback. And Cam Newton seems to be one of those players where he's either a starting quarterback or he doesn't have a lot of value. Cam Newton as a backup, to me, is going to be an issue with your starting quarterback because of all the things you're talking about. That name, every time your starter throws a bad pass, every time he throws an interception, fans, media, you got to put in Cam. Same thing with Kaepernick. And this is why teams, I think, shy away from that. because you've been in these rooms. I represented Hasselbeck, who was a starter and a backup to Brett. And the whole thing is the backup quarterbacks, plural, their number one job, in my mind, you may disagree, their number one job is serve the starter.
It's like a vice president. You're serving. That's all you're doing is you're serving.
You're getting them coffee. You'll do whatever you got to do. You serve the starter. You know, you mentioned I worked for Gary Vayner. We had a couple quarterbacks taking the draft at the end of the draft.
Congrats.
I give them advice. I say, your job is to go in there and serve the starter. Whatever you can do. Whatever you can do. I got Cole McDonald. He's a backup with Ryan Tannehill. Do whatever you can do. And if you're an executive and you look at Cam Newton or Colin Kaepernick, you're like, is that the guy that really is going to serve our starter? Or is he going to be thinking more about playing?
By the way, not just Colin and Cam. There's a lot of quarterbacks that cannot do what Matt Hasselbeck ended up doing at the end of his career, whenever he went back to being a backup behind Andrew Luck. He and I have had conversations. I don't know if they're public or private, but that was very difficult for him to do. That was a very difficult moment for him to be like, okay, I'm at the point in my career now where I just started in Seattle. I just started in Tennessee. I had a lot of success. But now I'm at the point in my career where I'm going to have to serve one of these younger quarterbacks and kind of give over game. Even though he still thought he had years left to play, it was like that mental decision to go and do that. Not a lot of quarterbacks can do that. So I would assume Cam Newton, with his ability, his skill set, was never thinking, I'm going to be a backup quarterback. But there had to be a team out there that was like, hey, Cam is much better than our guy. Much, much better than our guy. Let's get him in here. And they never did it. So now whenever the Patriots fans are absolutely miserable to deal with and insufferable and just disgusting to hear from whenever they're winning games, this is all Shad Khan's fault. That's all I'm saying. This is Shad Khan's fault. I don't want to hear anything else, Andrew.